So, this is Lesson 19, the Dark Ages, and this again is a shift of worlds. We call these the Dark Ages because we really don't have that much information about what happened. People didn't read or write very much, so we really have very little way to know what actually happened, other than the kinds of texts that we're reading tonight. They describe Europe as full of smelly barbarians who didn't read books and go around smashing axes into people's heads and taking their stuff. Europe is a lot like this for about 500 years. Of the authors we're reading tonight, really only one is considered a great author, and that's Augustine. We hear from him only briefly in these readings, but we'll hear a lot more from him in a couple days. The truth is, between the fall of Rome and the Renaissance, there's just not that much great stuff that appears. There's a great falling off, so what we read is the best that remains. In the reader, I tried to give you a feeling of what it would have been like to live in those days in the voices of the people who were writing at the time, who tell us what a dark age it really was. Okay, let's jump right in here. What I want to talk about first is this character, Sidonius. He died about the year 489, so he was witness to the end of the Roman Empire, and then he witnessed the period which just came after. He was in Gaul, which is today France. He collected these little anecdotes in which things happened, like, for instance, he heard about a speechwriter who was strangled by his slaves in his own house. This seemed to be reversing the natural order of things, and it kind of symbolized the way the whole world had been turned upside down. Lamenting the decline of civilization, Sidonius says, "Nowadays no one does much, and we seem infants compared to our forefathers. To the men of earlier ages, God granted supreme excellence. But now the world grows old, the seed exhausted, the marrow lost. In our time, little admirable or memorable appears. You may see the rotten roofs of churches falling in, the doors unhinged and blocked by growing brambles. More grievous still, you may see the cattle not only lying in the half-ruined porticos, but grazing beside altars green with weeds." So this is a world that's really in ruins. The next reading I'd like to talk about is by Gildas, who wrote about the year 560 in Britain. He provides an even deeper picture, a more horrendous picture, of just how bad things were in Britain after the Roman troops left in about the year 410. There were a couple of rough centuries there for the Britons when these invaders came in, the Irish and the Scots. Gildas says, "They went trampling over everything that stood in their path, cutting it down like ripe corn." So these Britons, what did they do? They called to their former friends in Rome, asking for help again. They called out the name of Rome, which echoed in their ears as a mere word. Again the Romans returned and planted their swords in their enemies' necks, causing among them a slaughter like the fall of leaves at the due time of year. There's that metaphor of the leaves again, which we first saw in Homer, and then we saw in Virgil, and now we see in Gildas, the dying of people represented as the falling of leaves. Then there's a discussion of the Irish and the Scots. They came like dark throngs of worms who wriggle out of cracks in the rock. They cover their villainous faces with hair, but not their private parts with clothes. So there's these bearded naked warriors who were coming out of the rocks and attacking them. The barbed spears flung by their naked opponents tore our wretched countrymen from the walls and dashed them to the ground. But then the Britons fight back for a while, and we get this theme coming, which is that they beat the barbarians back, and then a time of truce comes. The people forget to keep their guard up in this time of peace, and then they become luxurious and lazy and wicked, and their kings become tyrants, and the invaders return, and the whole cycle repeats. And it repeats several times until finally the Britons have to decide, what are we going to do? Because they've got these Irish and these Scots who keep coming back. So, just as the Romans invited in the Goths and other tribes to try and protect them, so the Britons invited in the Saxons. And they lived to regret it, because basically the same thing happened to them as happened to the Romans. These Saxon mercenaries kept asking for more and more food, more and more money, and when they didn't get it, they attacked until they got it. And then, once they got it, they just kept attacking. The barbarians admitted to the island asked for supplies, falsely representing themselves as soldiers ready to undergo extreme dangers for their excellent hosts. After receiving these supplies, they again complained of an insufficient monthly allowance, swearing that they would break their agreement and plunder the whole island unless they received more money. So then these battles occur between the Saxons and the Britons, and they last for generations. Swords glinted all around, and the flames crackled. A purple crust of congealed blood coated the altars, fragments of corpses crushed under the tower stones, as if mixed up by some dreadful winepress. Which is an interesting metaphor, but he's talking about how much blood is flowing. And yet something happens here, which is the root of the King Arthur legend. Wretched Britons gathered from all directions and prayed that they should not know total destruction. Ambrosius Aurelianus led them. This Roman nobleman alone had survived the shock of the storm. His parents had worn the imperial purple and had died by violence. Under him our people regained their strength and challenged the victors to battle. The battle went their way. From then on, victory went now to our countrymen, now to their enemies. This lasted right up until the year of the siege of Badon Hill, pretty well the last defeat of the villains. We happen to know from something called the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which is a few hundred years later, that the Battle of Badon Hill in the year 517 was supposedly the great victory of King Arthur. But we don't really establish that until later, and actually it's in some dispute. So the question is, was Ambrosius the original of Arthur? And I believe that he was. Or some people say he was Arthur's uncle. But clearly, according to Gildas, Ambrosius Aurelianus did the things which later legend assigned to Arthur. So there's this idea that you shouldn't multiply concepts beyond necessity, and there's no reason to believe there's two people who led these revolts. It's one guy. Gildas is calling him Ambrosius, and later ages call him Arthur. Arth in the Britons' language meant battle leader, so Arthur Aurelianus could have been contracted to Arthur. But again, after they drive the Saxons back at Mount Badon, things slide back into chaos. An age succeeded then that did not know the storm, had only experienced the present calm. They shook down all the controls of truth and justice, leaving no trace, not even a memory, among the church and state, except among a few. And so, then again, Britain, after Arthur or Aurelianus, devolves under these tyrants. They despise the harmless and humble, but exalt their military companions, bloody, proud, and murderous men, enemies of God. We should have rooted them out and erased their names. So what Gildas is saying there is it's the opposite of the last lines of the Aeneid, where Aeneas is told that the Romans are supposed to spare the defeated and humble the proud. These tyrants are doing the opposite. They're trampling on the meek and they're exalting their bloody, proud knights. So Gildas just ends by saying, "Woe to those who call bad good and good bad, trading darkness for light and light for darkness." Again, the idea of a reversal of the natural order, which is a theme after the fall of Rome. Or, as the British said after we defeated them in the American Revolution, the world turned upside down. Let's go now quickly to The History of the Franks by Gregory of Tours. Gregory gives us a number of anecdotes about King Clovis, who's quite a violent fellow, but who unites all of Gaul into one kingdom under the Franks. And from that comes really the notion of Christendom or Western Europe. The core of it is that Clovis converts to Catholicism or to Christianity, and we get this description of the baptism of Clovis, all the pageantry, which by the 12th century becomes the model for a lot of scenes of Christian court splendor in chivalrous romance. They draped the public squares with colored cloths, adorned the churches with white hangings, and prepared the baptistry. Sticks of incense gave off clouds of perfume, sweet-smelling candles gleamed bright, and the holy place of baptism filled with divine fragrance. Then the bishop baptized King Clovis, saying, "Gently bend your neck, and from this day worship what you burned, and burn what you worshipped." And that's a very famous line. When Clovis had been a pagan, he'd burned Christian churches. Now he's being told, well, you're a Christian, so you should go and burn pagan temples. And it is true that some of the Christians did destroy pagan shrines and pagan temples, regarding them as the works of the devil, and some of them even burned pagan writings, which is a great tragedy. For instance, the library at Alexandria, Cyril incited the Christians against the pagan works in the library. So we lost a lot in a number of fires, including most of the tragedies of Sophocles and most of the writings of Aristotle. Okay, so now let's just finish off tonight with the idea of saving civilization. Because conditions were so insecure and there was so much disorder after the fall of the Roman Empire, culture came to a hard stop. Philosophy and humane discussion almost disappeared. Parents could find no schools to educate their children or teachers to instruct them. Books vanished not only because Christians banned them, but even more because people who didn't want to freeze to death burned books in fireplaces when they ran out of firewood. Despite the chaos in the barbarian kingdoms, learning and letters did not wholly disappear. Because of the monks. And we will learn more about the monks tomorrow. But these monks collected fragments of Greek and Roman books, and they put them into primers, sort of like this Reader Best of the West. So the post-Roman Europeans fused these scraps with their Judeo-Christian stuff and with their German stuff into something totally new. Along the way, there was a debate in the 4th and 5th centuries between those Christians who thought the Greek and Roman learning was good and valuable and should be preserved, and others who thought the Greek and Roman views were bad and the work of the devil and should be gotten rid of. So classical humanists that we've been studying for the most part, they aim to achieve excellence in this world. They wanted the maximum cultivation of human talent. But Christians subordinated this world to a higher reality. And for Christians, the main purpose of life was salvation, entrance into the kingdom of heaven after death. So the question was, do these Greek and Roman works help us get to heaven, or do they hurt us and lead us astray? Some Christian churchmen thought that Greek intellectualism and reason posed a threat to Christian teachings. But other Christians tried to integrate Greek learning into the Christian worldview. Eventually, those who advocated the Greek and Christian, together with the Romans also, they prevailed. And so Christianity did preserve some of this idea of rational thought, which was the priceless achievement of the Greek mind. But the first guy who objected to the classical learning was a guy named Tertullian. He thought that Christians should just seek God through simplicity and not so much reading and fancy intellectual stuff. And in a way, Tertullian anticipates the anti-rational Christianity of Leo Tolstoy, the Russian novelist who wrote War and Peace and Anna Karenina in the 19th century. Very simple peasant's faith, and all this intellectual stuff is just a bunch of hogwash, according to Tolstoy and according to Tertullian, who says, "A plague on Aristotle who taught logic, the art which destroys." And then Tertullian says, what has Jerusalem to do with Athens? What has the church to do with Plato's Academy? I have no use for a Stoic or a Platonic or an Aristotelian Christianity. After Jesus Christ, we have no need of speculation. After the gospel, no need of research. When we come to believe, we have no desire to believe anything else, for we begin by believing that there exists nothing else in which we must believe. This attitude is called dogmatism. It means an inflexible adherence to views, no matter what. So no argument is going to convince Tertullian that he needs anything other than what he already knows. Opposed to Tertullian is Clement of Alexandria and also St. Augustine, who do believe that classical learning is valuable. We hear from Clement that love of wisdom does not lead us away from faith. God gave the Greeks philosophy, a clear image of truth, as a gift before Jesus came. Philosophy helped the Greeks attain righteousness. Wisdom conduces to piety. It supplies a preparatory teaching for those who will later embrace the faith. In other words, there is no reason why you can't have wisdom and faith, as well as wisdom from logic and from reason and from science. Why can't we have all that, as well as the faith-based and mystical stuff that we also get from the New Testament and from the Old Testament as well? The idea is, put it all together and take the truth where you can find it. God causes all good things. Some he gives us in the Old and the New Testament, others come from philosophy. Philosophy acted as a schoolmaster to the Greeks, preparing them as the laws of Israel prepared the Jews for Christ. Finally, Clement says, to partake of the power of God, we must philosophize. So with that, I think we put a pin on the worldview which is going to continue for 1,500 years, until finally people begin to get rid of Christianity, which really doesn't happen until the 18th and 19th century. For a long time, a millennium and a half, this compromise that's worked out by Clement of Alexandria, this intellectual peace treaty, really holds in the West. So instead of the Pax Romana, we have this Pax Mensa, a mental peace.